Hi, Sarah.
Hi, thanks, Colette. So I'm Sarah Titheridge. I run ArtTechSpace. We have been incredibly lucky that Colette has organised all of this training over the last couple of weeks, and this is the final week with our online sessions. These were ones that were highlighted in the art technician surveys that we did. Was it last year, Colette? Would have been, right? Yeah, last year. Where we asked was there any professional development that anybody would like to have, and we had it was highlighted that the union and speak to union and insurance was something people wanted to hear about. The RAMS risk assessments and sorry, I just needed to shut my door. I'm so sorry. I just hear a cat about to go feral and I'd forgotten. And sorry about that. And tonight's session, which is, what are we doing? We're doing CVs and invoicing. So it's not the most exciting of topics, but it's really important for you guys to know. Just some tips and tricks. So as part of ArtTechSpace, we do a lot of recruitment, specifically for people working within the art technical industry. And so we see a lot of CVs and a lot of cover letters. So this is just some of the stuff that we've noticed, as well as actually having been involved with some actual full-on recruitment. So these are just some guides. Essentially how you do your own CV and also invoice is up to you, but this is just what we have found employers want the most. And yeah, so we'll start off with a slideshow, just some of the tips that I've got for CVs and invoicing and cover letters as well, actually. Generally, this is done as like I've normally held this as quite an informal discussion. So, but people said that it's really helpful just to have some kind of concrete information initially, and then we can open it up to a chat to discuss any areas you'd like to discuss, seeing you've got us in front of you. And we do have quite a bit of time. The slideshow won't take that long. So do use this opportunity. You've got Colette and myself who have worked within the arts for a long time. Use us to ask us questions and discuss anything you want to discuss. This is open and here for you to get what you need from it. So, okay, I will start sharing my screen. Can you see that?
Yeah, I think it's just, coming through to slideshow mode. Perfect. Thanks, Sarah.
Okay, so art technician CVs and invoices. This is pretty saucy stuff. Let me just minimize myself. Okay, so CVs and cover letters, they're you putting your best foot forward to help you get the right job for you professionally, financially, and personally. Because a job is not always just about money. Sometimes it's about being professional. Sometimes you want to develop your career more, but also personally what you need from a job. So, hours, flexibility, things like that. They, in general, a CV and cover letter, think of them like a snapshot of your experiences, knowledge, and skills. So in general, as a general rule, you should be as clear, concise, and professional as you can be in both those documents. A tailored CV and cover letter is important to get your foot in the door with an employer. Because essentially it's the first thing they're going to see of you. It's the first interaction they have. This is you trying to get their attention, essentially, and show that you're the right person for them to at least engage with in an interview, if not give you the job. A specific art technical CV and cover letter are imperative to gaining work as an art technician professional. An artist maker CV will not cut it unless, of course, it's applicable to the role you're applying for. So say if you're applying for an artist assistant working in a studio fabricating work, your artist CV is going to probably be a lot more applicable. But essentially, you should have two if you're a maker artist. Not all of you will be, but you should have a separate one from your art technical CV. If you can, of course. Sometimes you don't have the experience when you're starting out, but you generally will have some transferable skills that you can put in a more tailored CV for art technical work. So in this session, we'll cover do's and don'ts of CVs and cover letters, as well as some advice about having, because we've seen so many CVs and cover letters over the years. You're a wonderful, skilled lot, and that should be reflected in your job applications. We want you to put your best foot forward. So here are some tips and tricks to help you. Okay, so lots of people think this is something that you shouldn't do, but I have to say, as someone who does a lot of recruitment, please only apply if you fit the essential job requirements that are listed in the description for the job. Now, some job adverts, they will have essential job requirements as well as desired skill requirements. Now, the essential means that unless you meet almost all of those skills, they're not going to look at you for their job, unfortunately. If they say desired skills, it means that there are things that they would like to see, but they're not essential. But essentially, if you see a lot of the essential skills you can fill, maybe not all of them, but essentially most of them, like I'd say like 75% of the essential skills, then they will definitely look at you for that role. In terms of the desired skills, it means if they don't have an essential and say desired, then you should just take a punt on it and give it a go and see whether they think you might be a good fit for the role based on what skills and experience you have listed on your CV or in your cover letter. Yeah, and like I know it's really, really tough to get your foot in the door, especially when you're first starting out as a technician. It's very difficult to try and get in an institution to get work. But essentially, if you don't fit those essential criteria, you're wasting your time as well as theirs, and they're just not going to look at you. I'm really sorry. It's horrible, but it's true. When you're looking at the remuneration of a job, if it isn't quite right for you, but it's kind of in the ballpark, hopefully, if you were to get the job, hopefully they might meet you at what you want in terms of the money for the job. If a job advert states the pay is dependent on experience, then just go for it. You just never know what it might be. And it generally means they're also not 100% sure on what they should actually be paying someone in that role. Also, occasionally it will be because they're actually not going to be paying very well, especially in the arts. They do that a lot. But you never know, just give it a go. But if the pay rate, though, you look at it and you think, that is really, really far away from what I need in terms of that, looking at the job description and so what they require you to do within that role and then the pay for it, just have a really good think about whether it is something you really want to go through, because the whole process of tailoring a CV and cover letter to a specific job, and then the interview processes, all the other stuff that comes along with it, that, if you look at the money and say, oh, that's just too far away from what I need, and you're more than likely probably going to turn down the job because of it if they weren't to meet you on it, then you've got to just weigh up whether it's worth actually going through with the process. But you just never know also what if an employer will meet you on the money, but it's up to you to decide whether you're willing to take the risk and spend the time really that it takes in job hunting, because it's so much time and effort. We'll come back to money though a little bit later. So in terms of like thinking about applying, even if you don't meet any of the essential skills, any of the desired skills, or even maybe just like one or two, and thinking like, oh, maybe I'll put myself out there and like, maybe they'll think of me for another role, which used to happen quite a lot, but that was before GDPR laws came in that they can't store your personal information unless they specifically ask you to keep your CV on file. So I mean, it's always worth giving it a go if you can be bothered, to be honest, but just be mindful that like it's not something that organizations do anymore, that they won't keep CVs on file. But again, like it's up to you, just give it a go. Recruiters will often, if you're going through any sort of recruitment company, which there's a few operating now for art technical work, they will sometimes get back to you and say, oh, maybe we can keep your CV on file or they will say, can we just contact you in the future? That's what they're more likely to do these days. But essentially, if a recruiter or employer looks at your CV and goes, they don't have any of the requisite skills at this time, most likely your CV is gonna go in the bin. I'm sorry, it's mean, but it's unfortunately what happens a lot. Mainly because employers they see a lot of CVs, and also a lot of them, you've got to remember that a lot of them are going through an HR department. They're often going through recruitment companies, things like that actually don't have a real understanding of the job. So very rarely do the people that will so technical managers, artist studios, things like that, they won't actually see your CV until you're kind of more of a sure thing, and they know that you're someone that they should put for the HR or whoever is doing the recruitment have put forward for the job. But we can talk about that a little bit more if there's any questions around it. So in terms of CVs, the main points are all an employer needs to know is, unless they've asked you for more specific information, and always remember that you've got often, especially if you're doing a full-time, part-time, you're applying, for a full-time, part-time, or fixed term some sort of contract as a PAYE generally, art technician, then they will only generally ask for your CV unless it's one of those sorts of organizations for those sorts of roles, that then they'll ask for a cover letter. And remember that if you are doing a cover letter, a lot of the information, the fleshing out of your CV is done in your cover letter. So a CV should be kept to facts and as concise as possible. So these are the key things that you need on your CV. So your name, obviously, contact information. So some people like to put on their CV just like one sentence that sums you up as an art technician. I'll show you my CV a little bit later. It's got to be really concise, just one sentence. You don't want a whole story, because that is something that if you want to sum up your skills or who you are as a person, you would do that in your cover letter. You want your employment history listed as the job title, the employer, and the dates you're employed, and a brief summation of the job that up to your last 2 jobs maximum. And it depends on how many jobs you've had and whether it's all been freelance and things like that. But it's not necessary to always write a lot of information about every single job you've done, like a brief summary, because job titles generally will tell people quite a bit about what you've done. But it's also about trying to keep your CV as concise as possible. You want to list any licenses and vocational training. And so you want to list the course title, the training provider, if you've got it, and the valid to date or the completion date. Any formal education listed as course title, provider, completion date, And references only ever say supplied upon request, and I'll explain why. So just to keep these things in mind when you're creating your CV shouldn't be longer than 2 pages. Anything over that is assumed that you feel you need to kind of pad out your CV with a bit of information because of lack of experience, or you don't know how to communicate effectively, is generally what I've found. It's really harsh, but that is kind of what people think when they're looking at CVs, unfortunately. You've got to remember you're trying to keep the attention of the potential employer, recruiter, and long CVs will turn them off. It's essentially too much information. And you want to be, again, as concise as possible. I will show you in a moment. I have a very short 1-page CV, and I also have a long CV, and it depends on the role that I'm going for. If I'm going for freelance work and someone wants to CV, I'll just shoot over my short 1-page CV. But if it's something that is a long contract, something a little bit more serious, I suppose, in a way, then I will send them my long CV. And also my long CV is what I use to cut and paste into job applications that you have to do online when they want you to use their format rather than putting in a CV. You don't need to list what you did for every role you have done. That's what your cover letter is for. And if you are doing that, then you need to keep them really specific to the job specification that you're working towards. So the job you're applying for, essentially. So again, tailoring it just that little bit based on the job spec that they've given you. Don't use fancy, busy design. A CV is about facts. You're not applying for a job in design, unless you are, of course, but essentially you're trying to keep it as simple as possible. But also people will get, I know a particular organization that if they get CVs that have like colored backgrounds, they get really annoyed because they don't want to print out in color. Because what will happen is they've got to print out in color or in all black and white, and it doesn't print out very well. But also it's about what they'll often do. I know this particular place I'm talking about, they will often ask for people, their CVs in a Word document, so they can actually take out any kind of personality that's been put into a CV, so it can also be looked at that it's kind of more of an even playing field. And also because they don't like the formatting that people put their CVs in, which takes them a lot of time, but you want to keep it as simple as possible. You don't want to put old unrelated experience. I know someone who continues to put on that they worked at Greg's back in 2012. That's not relevant. They generally, as a rule, people want to see maximum kind of the last, if you've done lots and lots of jobs, they say like the last 7 years, but you want to keep that as concise as possible. Again, there's some jobs that maybe just are not applicable. And again, it's about tailoring your CV to the job that you're applying for. We don't need to know your personal hobbies and interests. We're not looking for a soulmate. We're looking for, they're looking for an employee. And then I was a bit silly saying, although we're partial to long walks on a moonlight beach, if you're up for it. But I have recently seen, unless it is a hobby or interest that is applicable to the role, say you're applying for a job to work on a mural, and you've done lots of murals in your artistic practice, and that's not necessarily a hobby, I suppose, but if it's applicable, you put it in, but you don't need to have a personal section about trying to sum up what you like to do in your spare time when you're not working. If you feel you really want to put that in, that's again something you put in your cover letter if it's applicable. Licenses of vocational training should only be listed if they're still valid. Someone the other day said that they had a forklift license, but they got it in 2001. So it's no longer applicable because it's every 5 years you're supposed to renew those. But some people would say at least then you know that they can do it. But the reality is, unless the license is valid, then they can't actually use a forklift. And especially if they're applying for a role where a forklift license is necessary. No one's going to pay attention to that. References, you shouldn't give them to your employer, to an employer, potential employer, unless they've contacted you to discuss the role and it's in that kind of, you're getting towards being, you've had an interview, things like that, because it's your personal information. And when you have a referee, you should really always contact them before. So the process that should happen is that you apply for a job, they contact you saying that they're really interested. Ideally, you'd have an interview first, and then if they then want to proceed with your application, then they can ask for referees, because it's a very personal thing. But also then you would need to, the right thing to do and the professional thing to do is to then contact your preferred referees and just let them know that I'm applying for this job at this organization, and I think it'll be this person. They're going to contact you to ask for a reference for me. Are you okay with that? Because you want them to be prepared, your referees. You don't want them to be shocked that they're getting a call and to have kind of think on their feet, because you want them to put the best impression of you possible forward. So that's why it's best to let people be prepared. But again, also because it's your personal information, it's other people's personal information that you're giving out as well. So you just need to be careful around that. Please don't give an employer any personal documentation, such as copies of your passport or any training certificates, until you know you have the role and they have been requested. It's just, often it can be too much information. Employers, when they're getting CVs, especially if it's been a role that's been advertised quite widely, they will have a lot of applications. And so to then have lots of other documents in an email that's not necessary, it just can confuse things. But also, again, it's your personal information and you should be really careful with it. Don't apply past the deadline date and time. It's just gonna be disregarded, unfortunately. So this is an example of my CV. So as you can see, I've got my name at the top and then I've got my contact details down the left. Essentially what I've done with this CV is try to get in as much information as possible, but try to make it not too design heavy, but just a little bit different. I've been told, I've had feedback that this is good, that it's got a tiny bit of personality, but not too much, but also that when it's printed out is really easy to read, and it doesn't just look like a very boring thing. But some people might disagree with this. You can tell me what you guys think in a minute. And then I've got my contact details on left there, and then I've got my profile. So it's just my one-liner saying who I am as an art technician. So experienced and adaptable project manager who has extensive art handling experience and a passion for the industry. So it's just about being really concise and summing up exactly what I do and who I am as an art technician. And then I've got my professional experience. So because I've been freelance since 2017, I've just listed some of the places that I've worked, and just instead of saying, because I know some freelancers will list every single place that they have worked on a yearly basis. and said the exhibitions they worked on, unless you're only doing the odd job, art technical job like that each year, then don't list every single thing. I saw a CV the other day that was 4 pages long because they had listed every single job they'd worked on for the last 2 years. It was only 2 years, but they'd done a lot of freelance work, and it's not necessary. These are things that you can pull out and talk about specifically in your cover letter. If there's particular projects you've worked on at particular institutions. And then I just list my key responsibilities. Again, bullet points are a really good way to actually just get information across quickly. So key responsibilities include project management, staff project scheduling, planning logistics, creating installation, de-installation plans, fabrication, sourcing materials and services. So things like that. I also put in a bit about communication and relationships because I do a lot of managing, so managing projects. So that is quite key to what I'm doing, but communication is the really important part of that. And so then I always list a little bit of, like, you know, the people that I've worked with, which not always necessary, but it's something that I've done. Then I just list the rest of the roles that I've had going back to 2008, only because they're applicable. To be honest, a couple of them can probably come off now because it's not really relevant so much because I've done a lot of other work, but some of you won't have. So it may be that you didn't do technician work for a couple of years. So pop down the last thing. Again, it's about, I've done lots of other work during these years. But this is because this is my technician CV, so it's only focused towards being a technician. At the bottom, I say references can be supplied upon request, as I said. And then to the left, I've got the licenses that I currently hold, although, whoops, I need to update mine. I don't have my cherry picker anymore. And the formal education that I've had, so my Bachelor of Arts, my Diploma of Teaching, things like that. So that's my 1-page CV. Any questions about that? Let me see if there's...
Hi, Sarah. Yeah, just from my perspective, I guess just to say that I agree, I guess, as somebody that looks at a lot of CVs, in my role, primarily artist CVs, but yeah, you want to have something that is, yeah, clear, concise, you know, 1 to 2 pages, easy to read, memorable. And yeah, like subheadings, bullet points, all those things are really useful to anybody who's reading a CV, again, particularly if they're reading a large number of CVs. So yeah, absolutely. And again, as somebody who often writes references for individuals, I sometimes get an email from the individual asking me to be a reference after I received an email from the organization that requires a reference, which, you know, from my perspective is fine. I'm happy to oblige, but obviously, yeah, it is far better to give them that advance warning and to check in that they're happy to do that. So yeah, because
it just means you can be prepared, right? Because otherwise it can be quite a shock, especially if you're, you know, it's a busy day, you're in the middle of something else and you all of a sudden get a phone call, because some places want to actually speak to you on the phone. They won't just email. It can be quite a shock, and then you're like, okay, I'm not quite prepared for this, because you do need to prepare when you're a referee. You do, you know, because you want to support the person and like help them get the job, obviously. So yeah, it's all plays into that being, you know, professional.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because you're right, you know, yeah, phone call can certainly happen. More often than not, I found it is email, but they do tend to want the information back quite quickly. So yeah, if you get advance warning, it also means the individual can put some time aside to make sure they can, you know, do that reference giving justice and, you know, put something together that's really relevant. Yeah, I guess the other thing from my perspective in terms of CVs, you have the most recent stuff at the top. And yeah, I think
that's a good point. You always go yeah, your most recent experience at the top, and then work your way down to your
Least recent.
yeah,
Yeah.
your most recent is
Yeah.
at the top, and your least recent is
Yeah.
at the bottom. Yeah,
Absolutely. And again, I think you mentioned about noting down kind of organizations that you've worked with. I think that's really useful in terms of arts workers. It's even something that often you see like website developers and graphic designers do, because if it's an organization or a website that's familiar to the individual who is looking to potentially employ you, then they'll think, oh, okay, great, yeah, we understand their work, we've seen what they've done, and they've done a good job in that role. But like, if anyone's got any questions, please pop them in the chat or raise your hand. We had one while you were talking, Sarah, which I responded to in the chat, which I'll read out, and then if you want to respond in case you wanted to say something different. So Emily asked if it was worth writing these online sessions down on CVs as training/professional development. If so, would we be able to provide some form of proof that we were here? I've said that I would say no. I would include any practical training sessions individuals have done, but not necessarily professional development. It's kind of helping you to get to that point. So this would be something though that you could discuss in an interview environment if it were relevant, or if you're filling in an application form in addition to supplying a CV or instead of, and it asks about specific training that doesn't need to be accredited, then yes, you could include it in that instance. And I highly doubt that you'd be asked to give proof. So it's a funny thing to lie about. So I think it's one of those things that people would take your word for it, and if they wanted to ask more questions they would, but you wouldn't need to evidence that you've been at a training session of this kind. Whereas if it was something like cherry picker training, obviously you would be asked for documentation if it was something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, like, this is not the invoicing and CV stuff, it's not really applicable to the role itself, so it's about thinking about that. So then you wouldn't put it on your CV because it's not actually applicable. This is about you, like you said, Colette, like trying to get the job. This is helping you be more professional, but it's not actually really relevant to the role you would do. If, say, you were going to work in human resources, then it might be, but I think okay.
Thanks,
right,
Sarah. I'm just going to pop into the chat as well while it's maybe a relevant point. I know that a lot of you have perhaps already booked onto this, which is fab, but we are having an arts worker directory launch next week, taking place at New Art Exchange in Nottingham, and that's another way of platforming the great work you do. So it's not a case of asking for CVs or anything that's specific to specific job roles, but it's for use by organisations, projects and potential collaborators who are looking to potentially employ you and utilise your services. So in this instance, through consultation, we've found that what people want to know is what your role is if you're an art technician, because this is for all arts workers. Are you a composer? Are you a graphic designer? If you are a technician, what are your specialized skills? If you have any, AV, hybrid events, etc. What areas you work in. Again, in the East Midlands, places like Lincoln and Lincolnshire, for example, have a lower population of art tech workers kind of in that locality, so they might employ from further afield, but if they're contacting someone based in Nottingham that isn't able or willing to travel to Lincolnshire, then it's a waste of their time. And also within the directory itself, you'll be able to add in a little bit of kind of like free form writing, so specifics about yourself, where you would speak about organizations you've worked for in the past or big projects that are relevant. So that's where you're kind of maybe selecting the top 2 highlights from your CV and just popping that as a little bit more info about yourself, even adding a website link if it were relevant. So I've got another question in the chat. Are there any jobs/qualifications that will allow relevant experience to get into the art tech biz? Sarah.
Well, there's technically no qualifications at the moment. It's being worked on. There's an apprenticeship program through the government apprenticeship scheme, but that is not going to happen till most likely next year. but you have to be employed by an employer as an apprentice to be able to actually complete it. Other than that, there's nothing. There's no qualifications, like formal qualifications. I am talking with Coventry. They are looking at potentially having some qualifications and doing some kind of modules things. But that's still very much just in the initial discussion phase. Other than that, it's very difficult to get into this line of work unless you've got an in, essentially, or some transferable skills when people are looking for someone that is looking, when it's essentially when they want to actively actually train some people, but that doesn't happen very often, unfortunately. So then it's about very much who you know, and also just really getting yourself out there and doing things like looking online for companies that you would potentially like to work with or organizations, and then finding someone to contact or asking people you know to help put you in contact with people, things like that. It's really, really difficult starting out. I started out as a volunteer, which worked really, really well for me, but it's not something I actively push people about, and talk about too much, because no matter what work you're doing, you should be paid for your labor. And some organizations can very much take advantage, but it can be a really great way to get just a little bit of experience. Colette,
Yeah. It's a tough one because I mean, I'm not an art technician. I work in the arts primarily as a curator and facilitator and producer. But like Sarah, I started off as a volunteer, and I was in a fortunate position where I was able to volunteer. And not everyone is, financially or geographically able to do that. And I never recommend that anybody volunteer or take on unpaid internships. However, I started volunteering through an organisation called Circus Gallery in Nottingham, which was entirely volunteer-led, so nobody was paid. It still is ran entirely by volunteers. Following that, I did an unpaid internship at a gallery in the Midlands that now no longer does unpaid internships, which is a good move. But yeah, there are sometimes opportunities for paid internships. And I think through the work that ArtTechSpace are doing and through what CVAN East Midlands is doing and other projects, other networks like this, is that we're trying to really establish that there and prove that there is a need and a want for this, which we've been able to do over the last few years through the surveying we've done, in Art Fund investing in this project and funding us to deliver this training. It shows that they understand that need as well, and through conversations we've had with Arts Council, and Sarah has run previously a similar pilot program in the West Midlands. So there are kind of, these aren't qualifications, but they, on occasion, there are training programs that will take place. And I guess it's about staying connected with networks such as CVAN and ArtTechSpace to see when these kinds of opportunities arise. Through what we've been able to do with a core training program that happened at the end of last month at Nottingham Castle Museum and Art Gallery, was to be able to deliver something that people can put on their CVs and will give them access to paid work shadowing opportunities. But also a really valuable aspect that came out of that was the network building. So individuals who participated in that core training now have built up a network of knowing each other and have connected with various other technicians in the region and beyond who have supported in delivering training. So like Sarah said, it's it's that thing about building up a network and really utilizing that network and supporting each other to kind of to find work, basically, and to champion each other in what you do.
And we can have a chat about it, because there's some organizations that will definitely take on inexperienced people, but they pay you really badly. And I actually, having worked for one of them, an art logistics company, they're pretty tough. But we can talk about that a bit at the end. I think it would be nice to open it up, because I know there's a couple of people here that are working as technicians as well, that they might have some really helpful advice. But I will just continue with the boring stuff. Right. Oh, where's it gone? Oh, there we go. And then this is, oopsie, this is my long CV, because sometimes a job description will ask for a much longer, just far more information. And so this is essentially, it's that putting bullet points is essentially what I've done for most of it. Again, though, I just listed can you see my cursor?
Yeah.
Oh, sweet. These are the jobs that I listed on it, but essentially what I did was I just ran through, oh, they've disappeared. Whoops, they were meant to be at the side. But just ran through just essentially all the main points about things that were very applicable to the job I was applying for, that they didn't want a cover letter, they wanted it all in your CV. So essentially, I just put it all in this document. And again, I did the thing of putting listing all the places I've worked rather than itemizing it year, month by month, things like that, and just summarizing the key stuff. This is exactly the same as the content in this bit from my other one. So you can cut and paste. And what I find is I have multiple CVs, even as an art technician, of ones when I am going for more managerial type roles where they generally want a far more fleshed out CV and don't want a cover letter. Some that are very much focused on things like health and safety, like here, like I put in a bit about health and safety because they really wanted to know that you'd done a bit work covering that and had some experience. And things like that. So you just pick out bits and pieces, and essentially I have one giant document that I just cut and paste from that is applicable. And you can do that like across, I know people that do it across their artist CV as well as their art technician CV, that you just cut and paste. It's about really tailoring it to the job that you're going for. It takes a lot of time, and that is the really annoying thing about it. But unfortunately, unless because remember that as a CV, you're selling your skills and yourself to the employer. They want to look at a CV and look at it and go, oh, I can see this, this, and this. That's what we're looking for. So that's why it's actually great to do bullet points, especially if they've got those bullet points, which they did for this job that I was going for, that they had those as their main key essential things. So they can actually look at my CV and go, oh, they've done health and safety, they've done managing, they've done art handling, all sorts of stuff. But you're making it as simple for the employer as possible to choose you, to just get in front of them, essentially, for an interview, or hopefully straight for the job, but generally there's interviews. And again, I've done all the same stuff, but it's all just fleshed out and specific to the role I was going for at the time. Cover letters. It's not an art essay. I had one the other day that was just talking about their artistic practice. That's not what it's not what you're looking for as a technician. Anything art technician based, I'm generally not looking for anything like that. It's also not your whole life story, and it's also not a fairy tale. I've also had someone who actually wrote their cover letter as a story. Like, it's really interesting, and I definitely paid attention, but I then have to give that cover letter to an employer, and it doesn't always come across as the most professional, but also it means that you're not being clear, concise, clear, and to the point, and you're not always necessarily tailoring it to the job that you're applying for. So just remember, like, the whole thing is about being as concise and clear, to the point, to make, again, that decision as easy as possible for them to see that you're the right fit for the job. Cover letters, generally, I'd say try to keep it to 1 page if possible. Again, it shows that you can be clear, concise, and to the point. And you've got to think about it. You're essentially distilling down what your experience is for the employer. But this is also dependent on the application and what the employer is specifically asking you to document in your cover letter. Because I've had it with some roles where they will specifically say, in your cover letter, you must document that you have done this, 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 and this, and give examples. Again, you can condense that down and be as concise as possible, but sometimes that means it's going to be 2 pages, and that's okay. But I would say don't ever go over 2 pages, because again, the people that are looking at the CVs are generally going to be, they're going to be looking at lots of them. They want this to be as quick and painless as possible. So just try to keep it as concise as possible. Yeah, 1 sentence can say so much, but be careful that even though you are like trying to be as distilled as possible about your experience and who you are as a person, it also has to make sense. And it doesn't mean that then the length of your paragraph is, you know, essentially what should be 4 sentences long. You want it to be easy to read and really easy for the employer to consume, essentially. So that's why I love bullet points. It's a great way to reduce your content. It's kind of like a cheat, whilst it's also making it really clear about what your experience is and how you are a good candidate for the job that you're going for. So essentially, it's like listing your skills. And it means you're using a lot less words, such as this sentence. So managing, installing, fabrication and packing of artworks and artifacts for exhibitions, viewing rooms, art fairs, client installs and public spaces for various institutions in the UK and abroad as a freelancer. It's a bit wordy, I'll give you that, but it gets it across really quickly. And when I know that, you know, this is a bullet point, that's a whole wodge of information that is right there. I would probably have, depending on the job I'm going for, would actually take out, like, that's a very broad thing. Essentially, I'm saying I can do loads and loads and loads of stuff. But if it is a specific job, I would say something like fabrication for various artists and various different institutions, working with paper, cardboard, wood, you know, or just summarizing it as different materials, things like that. You can put some information about who you are as a person. Definitely, I think that's really good. You want to come across as approachable, and so saying things like, you know, it's all those cliches of like, I'm a really hard worker and I'm really passionate about art, but it does make a difference. People will pay attention. So you're thinking about like giving them just like a little taster of who you are and how you work. But don't tell fibs, essentially, or tell lies. So like, I have an excellent attention span, but actually you spend most of your time at work looking on your phone. I know a few people that have that in their CV and they're always on their phones when they're at work. If you know someone or have some connection with an institutional workplace, be explicit about this. So this is something I've wanted to just highlight to you guys, because I know a very experienced technician who the other day applied for a role who he should have got the job, but he didn't say in his CV that he'd actually worked at the institution as a freelancer when he was going for a part-time role. And a lot of CVs and cover letters, you will not get the people that are making the final selection about the employee, the potential employee, the candidate. They won't often see the actual personal information. They won't see a name. They won't see lots of the personal information. So unless they're really familiar with your CV, if they've seen it before, or if they're familiar with your experience, they won't know that it's you. And so this person missed out on this job because he never said that he'd freelance there. And it was only later on when they saw the CVs and he said, oh, I had actually applied. They were like, oh, well, why were you not explicit that you'd worked there? You need to actually just spell that out, because also it personalizes your letter. And you know, if say you worked there as in an institution, potentially as an invigilator or something, or you visited there, like let them know that you really enjoyed it, that you have like, it's about trying to make a connection and just stand out a little bit. And essentially it's a bit of you're essentially pandering to them, and you know, I don't know how to explain it other than a little bit of ass kissing, but it really makes a difference. And especially if you do know someone that works there, and as long as in the institution you're going for a role, you should say to that person, hey, I'm going for this role. Is it okay if I pop your name in there saying like, oh, that we've worked together and stuff like that? Because sometimes they will go and actually ask that person, or I've done it before where I've said, oh, I know such and such that works there. They speak incredibly highly of the department and really love their job. And it's been part of the reason why I wanted to apply, because I've heard such great things about it. I mean, some people might not like that. I think it's handy. It's definitely helped me. Colette, what do you think of that actually?
Sorry, Sarah, I didn't catch that.
Like putting in your cover letter that, you know, like a bit of like, oh, I've worked, I know this person that works there, and I've talked to them a lot about the department, the role, whatever, and it's been part of the reason why I've kind of gone for, because it sounds like a great place to work. Like, what do you think of those kind of personalizing and cover letter?
I think it depends kind of how heavy you're going on that. I think it's like sometimes
you don't
like,
go,
like if somebody's like, oh, if you get the vibe that they're expecting to get a role because of that. But I think it definitely shows, I think if you can show you've done your research, and that you're not necessarily just applying for that job because it's a job or because of the money, but because you're interested in what that organization is and does, and you know that you're interested in it because maybe you've been to their shows or whatever it might be. But if you've had conversation with someone who's worked there and they've been able to say, yeah, it's great because we build XYZ and we get involved in this way, and you think, yeah, that's what's made me want to apply for this job, absolutely. If you can articulate that, you're thinking, yeah, great. It's I guess it's a bit like we do studio reviews at primary where we ask, which is my other role, our studio artists to say why it's important for them to have a studio at primary. And we don't just want to say why it's important for them to have a studio, we want to know why it's important to have a studio there. So I think anything that is kind of specific to that place, or that particular work helps you, again, stand out a little bit. So
yeah, you can't be too heavy-handed with it. Like I know someone who did it recently that said, I used to date one of the managers, so I'm part of the family, so I should just get the job, which was like,
yeah, that's a no.
Yeah, it's a definite no.
But like you say, it's exactly how you do it.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, Colette. Where's it gone again? Sorry. Oh, lost it. Sorry, gang. There it is. Always get someone to have a look at your CV or cover letter before you send it to an employer or recruiter. You want it to be to look as professional as possible, and so you don't want spelling mistakes, you don't want grammatical errors. Also, it can really help because we're not very good at selling ourselves as human beings often, and a lot of people feel very uncomfortable writing CVs and cover letters in particular, because it's, you've got to be a bit of a skitey pants, you're kind of showing off a little bit. which is what you need to do. And so it can be just really helpful to have someone check it over for you. But also, it's if something is really difficult to read for an employer or recruiter, and there's poorly formed sentences and misspellings, it also makes it appear that you don't have an attention to detail, or maybe are not great with communication. And you just want to look as professional as possible. And, you know, I mean, I'm a terrible speller. I'm terrible, but I have to get things checked all the time. I, for a long time, had an employer that I worked for who was quite a big deal, that I had the name of the employer spelt wrong on my CV for 2 years before someone pointed it out to me. And I was incredibly embarrassed. I'm surprised someone hadn't pointed it out sooner, but it also probably was a lot of the reason why I didn't get a lot of job interviews at the time. But yeah, just get someone to have a look over it for you, just to give you some pointers and to look at those things like sentence structure and spelling mistakes.
Yeah, and I guess just to add that someone can be anyone. It doesn't necessarily have to be somebody from the same profession or even the arts. You know, sometimes in a way it might be useful to have somebody like I proofread stuff all the time for my friends who work for the NHS. I don't understand the terminology, but in a way it kind of helps them to think about how they're writing for somebody that might not, you know all the ins and outs, or, you know, I'm just there to look at structure and stuff like spelling. So it's, yeah, if you're, you know, even if it's, you know, maybe you're getting your housemates to look at it, maybe they're a chef, it doesn't matter. It's just getting an extra pair of eyes. They might notice something that you haven't because they're not the one who's written it. If you're the person that's written something, your eyes just kind of skirt over these things. You know, my spelling's so, but yeah, likewise, I spelt the title of my own dissertation wrong because you see these things so much, you just become blind to it. And I think obviously, you know, employers, you know, need to and do recognise individuals who are neurodivergent and maybe are dyslexic, etc., which is really important. But yeah, as long as you can structure these things in a way that is manageable for the employer too, who also, you know, for example, might be dyslexic. It's that kind of understanding how we're sharing and exchanging knowledge, but also bigging ourselves up. So.
Yeah, thanks for that, Colette. I've lost it again. If you are doing it's an email application, I've had it recently quite a bit. I don't know why. If you're emailing it to someone, put something in the text, the email body of the text. It's very strange and it comes across as quite rude, to be honest. And that goes for anything to do with any communication in general. Just like introduce yourself, put some pleasantries in there. You've got to think about, like, would you introduce yourself in person just by just passing them your CV? You would say, like, hi, I'm Sarah. Would you like, you know, I hear you looking for jobs, looking for employees, sorry. Would you like, can I give you my CV? Like they used to do back in the day. But just because you can't see the person, you need to remember, like, you shouldn't treat them any differently than you would face to face. So it's just about, again, being professional and putting your best foot forward. Whoops, that was meant to be on that page. Interviews and correspondence. So say you get offered an interview, be prompt and polite in your correspondence. It doesn't give the greatest impression when someone takes a couple of days to reply about an interview date, because normally that's what will happen. They will say, we really liked your CV, your application. We'd like to invite you for an interview. These are the dates that we have, is generally how it works. And so even if you don't have time to look at your schedule, you need to potentially rearrange things, just let them know with an email or a phone call or whatever correspondence that they've left, just saying, like, look, I'm in the middle of something at the moment. Is it okay if I just check my schedule and I'll get back to you as soon as possible? Sorry for any delay, but I'm really excited, things like that. because politeness, it goes a really long way, as well as like, say you got a phone call saying we'd really like you to come and interview, pop it in an email if you've got that email saying, hey, that was really great, thank you so much. Also after an interview, that's a big one. If you can, just saying, you know, I really enjoyed meeting you, it was really great. I really hope to hear from you soon, in regards to the job, things like that. Be prepared for interviews, and even if they say it's a casual phone video conversation, it's generally not with employers. If it's me doing it and I say it's casual, it generally is, I want to just have a chat with you, but I still want you to put your best foot forward a little bit, so I suppose it's not that casual. But research what you can of the employer, ask your friends and family their thoughts and experiences, as you should think of interviews as not only a way to impress the employer recruiter, but also as a way to establish if you want the job. That's what people really forget, that interviews are just not just for the employer. They're for you to see if you really want the role, but also research shows that you're interested in the role and the employer, as well as helping you make the right decision for yourself. So you need to prepare to talk about examples of the work that you've done. So standard questions for art technician work are generally, which I think you'll probably get in a lot of places, not just art tech work, but what is the most challenging project you've worked on and why was it challenging? What is the favorite project you have worked on? Why did you leave your last job? Why do you want a new job? Where do you see yourself in 5 years' time? Why do you want to work here, specifically in this role? When was a situation where things went very wrong and how you resolved it? Now, again, you're trying to relay that back to art technical work, but if you can't, just acknowledge that and just say, look, I haven't actually experienced that as an art technician, but this is how I dealt with it when I was working at such and such a place. It's just about showing that, especially if you're going for a role that you're not particularly experienced for and you get an interview or it's a very junior role, they just want to see that you've got transferable skills. But these are some really standard, like so many jobs I've gone for, not just art technician jobs. So these are kind of standard jobs, questions, sorry, that I'm asked.
I was just going to add quickly as well, Sarah, that now more and more so organizations will sometimes send questions out in advance, again thinking about how they can be more accessible as employers, and thinking about equity, diversity and inclusion in terms of recruitment. If they don't do that, you can ask for them to send the questions if that's something you will find helpful in terms of planning for the interview. And plan some of your own questions for them, like Sarah said, to it's about you getting what you need to get out of it.
Yeah. And also, especially with art technical jobs, I've found it more in museums and collections. They will have some objects which they will ask you to handle. So the trickiest one I had was a map. That was a huge map that I had to unfold and then put it back together the correct way, like following its folds and things like that, because I was going to be working in a archive where they had lots of maps in the cartography department, and so that was a practical thing. But sometimes also they will get you to prepare. They'll give you a scenario of I've heard of this happening quite a bit recently, a scenario such as there's a really difficult artist that you're installing their work. They've been a bit difficult to deal with. They haven't given you much information, and you've turned up on the job that day and they've brought all these materials and it's nothing that was agreed. How would you deal with the situation? And what would you actively do as a technician? Would you be making the work? Things like that. Like, because so much of what we actually do is a lot of actual people management rather than the actual art handling sometimes. So that's happening quite a lot, even for quite junior roles. I've heard of that happening, which is really interesting. But they generally, for something kind of tricky like that, they will give you it beforehand, like Colette was saying, with other sort of questions and stuff, so you can be prepared. So questions, how do I close that? Questions to ask employers. So as I said before, interviews are not just for the employers to see if you're the right fit for them, but it's also to see if they're the right fit for you. So some really good questions to ask, because often you don't get this information in even the job application advert. They often won't actually have a lot of this sort of information. And it's up to you if you feel comfortable asking about these things, but it's really good to actually understand what the role entails and just things around being professional. And it's very good for highlighting if they're actually a good employer. So things like, what are the working hours and days? Because sometimes they can be all over the place, and it's good to know if that's the right job for you. Do they have any training provisions? What benefits do you offer? Who would I be working with? So that's like, the teams, your manager, things like that. What would be the starting date? Is the workplace supported by a union? This one, what is the organizational structure? That can often be quite a big question, but it can also be quite important within smaller organizations, because it might be that actually you might be the kind of only real person doing a lot of things, not just the art technical stuff, that you'll be doing loads of other stuff. So things like, who would I be reporting to and interacting with? That's essentially what you want to find out. Is there room to move within the role or the company? And like, I always think it's a good thing to actually stipulate why, of like, I would like to have a more senior role in 2 years' time, or I would like to get a lot of experience doing X, Y, and Z. So it would be really great. Is this something, like managerial potentially I could do, or just even skills that you want to gain within the organization? And knowing what they provide in terms of holiday pay and sick pay, because some places are really rubbish. And it's really good to know, especially if you do have dependents, things like that. It's, they're often not used for holidays or, or for being sick. But, it's important to know these things. And I find, if an employer doesn't like you asking questions like that about the company and your rights and benefits, it's generally not a great sign that they'll be a fair and equitable employer. Generally means they're a bit of a bad egg. So it's a really good way to kind of flush out the badness sometimes, I find, which sounds awful. But so you get offered the role. So that's when you want to really talk about money, because you can ask about money definitely during the interview, but employers have a tendency to be a bit iffy about it. But as I said, like previously, money's important. We all need to live. And sometimes it's also not about getting like the most amazing job. It's about just earning some money. So when you are offered a role, that is the best time to negotiate your money and benefits as well, because it says that they've chosen you. They really want you. So you essentially have got a bit of power. And because what will often happen is, because that's the best time to negotiate and discuss money in general, because it's very, very hard to negotiate more money along the line once you're actually doing the job. It's essentially like it's your time to be able to bargain a lot easier. Some employers will be great on this stuff, but in my experience as a technician, most employers have been terrible. That once I'm actually in the role, then they're like, well, there's no need to give you any more money because we know that you're going to stay here and things like that. So yeah. Also, if they're not going to give you the money you want, they can just turn you down. Like, so if you want to actually negotiate more money, say, if they can't give you more money, they can turn you down, and then it's up to you to decide whether the role is right for you and if the pay is okay. But always go a bit higher than what you want, because you can always go down. Money's another one that people feel very uncomfortable negotiating as well. It's a bit of a tricky one, but it's really important. It means we can actually live our lives. So if you feel confident doing that, I really recommend doing it at the very beginning of a role. And that doesn't mean if it's not freelance or full-time, whatever, it's always before you start working there, it's generally a good idea to negotiate.
Sarah,
Okay, so you're not off.
I was just going to ask, if we're coming towards the end of the presentation, do you think it'd be useful to have a break after, before we go into questions, if people need to use the toilet, grab a drink, and want to think through some questions to ask?
Yeah, we're not far away. But is it, because we've been going an hour and a quarter, should we just have a little break now?
Yeah, let's go for it. Shall we have 10 minutes, or is that a bit long? Yeah, 5 minutes. Let's go 5.
5 minutes.
Yeah. So if we come back here at 7:20, everyone, and we'll continue from where Sarah left off with the if you don't get the job.
Yeah, really.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Right. We'll see everybody in 5 or 6 minutes. Okay, I think we're ready to start again then, Sarah, if you're ready.
Okay, super. Can't tell if anyone's there, but sure.
I'm there.
Okie dokie.
Oh, there you go. Here. Thanks, Nathan.
Let me just, okay. So you're not offered the job, which really sucks. And you've got to try not to take it personally if you're not offered a role. It's really frustrating and it can make you feel incredibly defeated. But you've got to just keep going. It really sucks. Job hunting is just crap at the best of times. But you've got to just try and use it as an opportunity to better yourself and also your professionalism. So ask questions of the employer or a recruiter for feedback. So was there a particular reason I didn't get the job? Was there anything I could have done to change the outcome? What skills should I upskill in? Like any recommendations, things like that. You're not always going to get an answer, but sometimes you will. Sometimes people are lovely and they'll take the time to actually just say, look, I'm really sorry, but yeah, we felt you just needed some more experience in this area and things like that. It can be really helpful, and then it gives you something to work on as well. Whoops, the end of CVs. Oh, it's the end. Yeah, the last page of CVs. So just in general, I know it's really tough out there trying to find work, and in particular, trying to get into art technical work can be really, really difficult. And because you need to find something that fits you professionally, but financially and also personally, things that you need from a job. Even though I know it's really awful, but it actually can be a really great experience to like just talk about yourself and how great you are. Not only because it's good to remember how far we come in our careers, but also to know our worth and what we should expect from our employers and what we're willing to put up with and not and stuff. Like, we've got to try and take some positives from the fact that it is quite a demoralizing, quite a demoralizing thing, applying for jobs and interviews and things like that, if you're lucky to get interviews. But you just got to hang on in there. But that's the end of CVs. So just before we go on to invoices, any questions about CVs and cover letters and applications and things like that? Any questions?
If anybody wants to speak a question, please just feel free to unmute yourself and ask away before we move on to invoicing. No, I think we're good to go. If anything crops up, please pop it in the chat. Thank you.
So invoices. Oh, such another really sexy topic. So an invoice should be a simple document detailing who you are, the work you did, how much they need to pay you, and how they pay you. So I started talking with people about invoices because lots of employers really complain about it to me. I'm always like, well, have you told your employees, whether they're freelance, full-time, whatever, what information you need from them? But it's really good just to have a template. And this is essentially what you need on an invoice. So you need to let them know it is an invoice. So you need to have invoice written on it and the date next to it. Invoices are often used for tax purposes. Well, they're always generally, used for tax purposes. So it needs to be thought of as an official document, but also, especially if it's going to an accounts department, they want to make sure that they know what they're doing. So invoice means it's alerting to them that it's an inventory of information of work that's been undertaken that needs to be paid for. The date is also incredibly important because that will be your date that you then set your parameters of the payments, the length of that you need to receive payment. So the terms of your invoice, which I will chat about at the end of this. So also you need who is the invoice from. So you need your name, you need your address and contact details. Sometimes they don't I always think at least either your email or phone number, because sometimes like a finance department or somebody, whoever's paying the bills, will need to get in contact with you, and they don't always have that information. They're not always the one that you have been directly contacting. It's often that you will pass an invoice to whoever you're working for, so like a technical manager, say, and then they pass it on to someone to pay the invoice. So it's just really important that there's contact details there, and also it's very clear that it's from your name, address, and contact details. It's also really important to say who the invoice is to. So as I said, they're used for tax purposes. And so I've had it quite often that although I will look up an employer's their formal name, because some places have acronyms and all sorts of stuff, that you need the formal name for an invoice because it is a tax document, that they will contact and say, actually, you didn't put limited at the end, or things like that. Or actually, we're a shady arts organization and we actually have our accounts done under this completely different company, which also happens quite a lot. So again, you want the employer name, their address, and contact details, or sometimes they will ask for it to be care of a specific person, that it's so they know that it has come through that specific department, say. But that's something your employer should also tell you. You shouldn't need to prompt that. You want to list the dates that you worked and the times you worked from and to on each of those dates. Now, that's really important. A lot of people will put just, a date, or they will say 3 days and it's cost this much. Often for some institutions, like commercial galleries or logistics companies, they often need to charge back some of those hours. They need to split them up, or days, hours or days, and they need to split them up and charge them to particular clients. So it's really helpful, but also to just double check that you definitely worked an 8-hour day, and so therefore we're paying you for an 8-hour day, and things like that. So it's a really good check for you, but also for them, around hours and days. But also sometimes it's used as just a keeping track, because often if you worked on one, like say an install on one day, deinstall the next day for the same employer, and you're putting those on the your invoice, what they'll then do is take that information and they essentially have to do costings out, which you don't need to worry about too much. It's just a good rule of thumb to just do that, so you know exactly what you did and they know what you did. It also means, though, you need to keep a good record of these things, which sometimes not all of us are so good at doing, because you leave work and you're like, yeah, I'm out of work, but I don't want to think about work. But it's a really good idea to just note it in a calendar on your phone or a book or something. Often employers will like a little bit of context of what the work entailed. Like I said, my example was installing artwork at Gary Barlow's house, which I have actually done. Some employers may also want you to itemize each day if you were doing different things each day throughout a day, so they can charge back to the client, etc. Like I was saying, you want to note what the actual rate was for standard hours. So £20 an hour for standard hours, and overtime rate is time and a half. So that will be, what is that? Oh my God, maths. £30 an hour. That you want to itemize those things. Always make sure you note down the total, because you're going to put the total of the money that's owed to you. Make sure it's correct. Always, always, always triple check it. The amount of invoices I get where people haven't actually done their maths properly. I know it's tricky sometimes, but just make sure you sit down and work it out and actually go 8 hours equals that amount, and do a bit of a running total can be really helpful for that, I find. I'll show you on an invoice in a bit. You need your bank details. I do a lot of work overseas, so I also have to add on my international banking information, which is referred to as an IBAN. You can get that information from your bank. It's not something that sits just right there, but in your banking apps and things like that. But that often is quite helpful. But if you're doing anything in the UK, just your sort code and account number and the name of the that the bank account is under. Really important to have that stuff correct. I had it the other day that I didn't, and I didn't get paid for a really long time because of it. The terms of your invoice, it's really a good idea to put at the bottom of your invoice things like essentially how long your terms of payment are. So payment must be received within 14 days from the date of this invoice. Some people put 30 days. I put 14 because it normally means they do actually pay within 14. So that's 2 weeks. But legally, I mean, I also have it on one of my invoices that saying that I will charge interest after 30 days, which you are entitled to do. It's a percent of, I think it's like 5 point something percent interest. Oh no, it's higher than that at the moment. Can't remember what the interest rate is at the moment, but essentially you can find out online about late payment on HMRC. It tells you a bit about how you can go about it. But again, for those that were in the union chat earlier today, that's a good one to go to the union about if you're not getting paid and you and things are difficult. But it's a good way to just prompt people that I expect payment after this date, after that date. If you haven't within 14 days paid me, then I will be chasing you about it, just to let them know. And then I always put just like a nice little salutation at the bottom, like a thank you. This is an example of a terrible invoice. So yeah, it was essentially, I need a bit more information than that. I wasn't sure exactly. It was a very, very busy month for me. And I was like, what days did they work? And I needed to essentially cross-reference that against a lot of other hours. And essentially, I just needed more information. Yeah, it just needed a bit more. They also, yeah, they've got the date on there. Also, a lot of people will put their own reference that you can put in their bank account so you can track essentially payment. Some people don't bother with that. It's a way for you to keep track more than anything of your invoices and track and stuff through your tax. And also through your banking and stuff, but it's not imperative, but it is quite helpful. But yeah, don't do it invoice like this. Need a lot more information. The dates, the times worked, and what the rate was, the agreed rate, and things like that. Yeah, this is getting much better. So this person was great, and they told me what day they work, the date. And what they did was they split it into 2 different rates. So this was their standard rate it was 10 hours at £20 an hour and the total, and they worked from 6:30 till 4:30. Then they also did 3 extra hours at overtime rate, and so they've added that. So it's really helpful for employers just to see all of that and that working out, just so you know exactly what it was for. This person has also said it was for Freeze Art Fair, for Crown Fine Art. Yeah, it's just so much easier if you can spell all this stuff out, because also I'm going to, as an employer, going to actually double check all of that. Oh shit, it's got his personal information on it. We'll just skip over that. It's really helpful just to have all that information. Here again is another person that's done it a slightly different way, which is really pixelated. But they've given me their hours, the dates, and then the total hours is also quite helpful sometimes. And then just an itemizing of it. They go to then explain what the rates were. I think it's much easier doing it this way, where you break it down. this way it gets a little bit complicated, but again, it's quite good. And they've got a lovely thing at the bottom saying thank you for your custom, which is very nice. They also have a nice little picture at the bottom of theirs, but you don't have to do that sort of jazzy stuff. It's up to you. And that's it. Any questions, comments, want to chat about anything?
Thanks, Sarah. Just to say, just today I received an invoice where the individual had charged me or the organisation too little. So I'd noticed that and got back in touch with them, but it isn't always the case. Sometimes while organisations will need to put a purchase order number on it, which might mean that things take a little bit longer. Sometimes that can be added by the person dealing with your invoice, or it might need to be added by you, so people might get back to you. Some organisations are slower than others. Universities and councils notoriously take a lot longer. They might need to add you to their system as a freelancer or an employee before you're even able to invoice. So it could, in that instance, even be worth asking. So you could, be, let's say you're going to be doing 4 weeks work with them, 2 weeks work with them, you could get yourself added onto the system before you're invoicing them, to kind of get ahead of the game and to get your funds quicker.
Yeah, especially if you are doing freelance stuff for those, like, it's always a good idea to just establish from the very beginning, like, how am I invoicing? What format do you need it in? Like, what information do you need? It's really, really helpful. But also, like Colette is pointing out, like, I did some stuff with, no, not going to say their name. And it took them 3 months to get me put on their system. That's a long time to wait for pay. Luckily, I sorted that out before. But it can take a really long time. So it is one of those things, like a good prompt. It's good that you flagged that, Colette, of like, ask them before you start work, like, how am I going to get paid and what's invoicing system and things. So is 3 months legal? Oh, well, it was 3 months just in terms of, Nathan's asked, is 3 months legal? 3 months is just in terms of getting me on their system as a freelancer and a supplier. It wasn't actually for pay. Initially, it was just they needed me on their system before I would do work for them. I'm doing work for them in the future, essentially. But no, 3 months waiting for pay is not legal. And that's when you'd be charging them a lot of interest, and you would be talking to the union about it, that's for sure. But it's one of those things as well, often when I've done it, where an employer has not paid me for a number of months, and then they've asked me to do some work, and I've been like, nope, no, I'm not doing work for you until you pay me. And it's amazing how quickly then you get paid, if they want you enough, of course.
Are there any other questions for Sarah? I was just going to add as well, with regards to being put on a system, when I work for a local authority organisation, if somebody was put on the system, with their details, with their address, etc., and let's say they're still working freelance, on and off for installations, for installs over 2-3 years, and maybe they've moved and they've changed their address, and they invoice you with their new address, and that new address doesn't match what's on the system, again, you won't be.
Yes.
Yes. Well, has that happened to you, Jenna? Right, maybe. But yeah, so again, if you are moving and you're changing your address, then be sure to update your employer in advance of invoicing, so they can update you on their system, so you don't end up not matching things up. So complicated, and not every organisation, institution has that system, but again, usually local authorities and universities will do. No problem, Jenna. Any more questions, or should we begin to wrap things up?
Any comments from anyone who's working as a technician at the moment? Any tips, even if you're not working as a technician, to be honest, because a lot of this stuff is not actually just based on technicians, like this is kind of universal, a lot of this stuff.
Absolutely, yeah. A lot of the examples that have come to mind for me have been, technicians, artists, other freelance arts workers in different roles. So yes. So I mean, I expect that maybe a number of you might be potentially working in different capacities. So a lot of this is something that you can apply maybe in various areas of your freelance arts workers work. And again, just to say, with regards to CVAN East Midlands, we're always happy to help with these kinds of things if you've got any questions. Emily said, I'm working as an art technician in education, but find that these sessions are helpful for the future regarding work experience. That's great. Thank you, Emily. Would you include images of the work you installed as an art technician in your CV?
That was something I meant to say. Photos. Don't put a photo of yourself on your CV. It's going to get cut off anyhow. Also, some employers, in particular, certain parts of the industry that are still a little bit, let's just say backward, will judge people based on their photo on their CV and make decisions based on that. Discriminate, essentially. It's not necessary to have a photo of yourself. Photos of actual work that you've done as an art technician, not unless they request it, to be honest. It's just more things. If you are asked for an interview, you can say, look, would you like me to bring some examples of some things that I've worked on? If sometimes they will be specific, like I worked on a mural job and I asked for some images of previous work you've done. Essentially, if it's asked for, provide it. If you really, really want to, then ask if you're at kind of interview stage. But otherwise, I wouldn't say put it in because it's just more stuff for people. And yeah. Again, it's about trying to be as concise and to the point as possible. Yes, photos can do that a lot better sometimes, but it's again making it a bigger package of things, of information. Would you agree with that, Colette?
Yeah, I would. I know for the core art tech training program, we said that individuals could attach images, and we did that as, I guess, a way to make the application form more accessible as well, because and it was a different kind of thing, I guess, to having a job role. And sometimes, you could be asked, if you have one, to share a link to your website where there might be images. So then again, the employer is, I guess, choosing, how they browse your website, and it's not, kind of chunking out a PDF document. So yeah, I wouldn't expect to see images on a CV, I guess, for any kind of role really. Not just art technicians, but if you get the opportunity to get great images of any installs that you've done, brilliant. Certainly keep them. Like Sarah said, it's something that might well come up, they might be useful for you. You can even get in touch with organizations and ask them for images if they've had somebody document an install, you've done something particularly ambitious, maybe in a build, and if you get permissions to use them and to use them in the way that they tell you to, so always crediting the photographer, etc., you could say include those images on your website, but again, I wouldn't put them on a CV.
Yeah, agreed.
Emily has also said, and where else can I take my career? It's a big question.
What do you mean, Emily? You're gonna need to work, like, what do you want to do?
Emily, if you can expand, that would be great, either in text or verbal. Maybe you mean this was connected to my last comment. Oh yes, so you're working as an art technician in education. So is this thinking about, you want to be teching not just in education, you want to be working in, say, galleries as a technician, you want to be working within a university, you want to no longer be teching, maybe in the future? Yes. So you're looking at how to move from being universities or galleries, hopefully. So yeah, how, I guess, Sarah, would somebody make that switch from being maybe a technician in, say, a college environment to working as a technician freelance in galleries?
I know a lot of technicians that have worked in universities or colleges in education, essentially, that have moved on to work within galleries and museums. It depends what you want to do. So do you want to install exhibitions? Do you want to fabricate works? I mean, it's a massive industry. I know you're saying galleries, but that also, there's lots of different levels to be an art technician. Like some people, like I know a commercial gallery where one of the technicians there, all he does is just stretch canvases. Are you talking about like a whole, like a, yeah, I'm guessing you're meaning like quite generic in terms of like doing kind of a bit of everything, I'm guessing. But how you get into that, it's one of those things. It was like I was saying, talk to people you know who work within institutions you would like to work in. LinkedIn was actually quite good for me when I first went freelance and didn't have a lot of connections within institutions I wanted to work in, because I did a bit of research. I looked at institutions I wanted to work in, and then essentially stalked people that worked there as like technical managers and things like that, exhibition managers, and just contacted a load of people through LinkedIn once I befriended them. Or it's not befriended, is it? Connected with. And then I would just ask people if they had any work. I also did it, which I found was a lot more beneficial to me, and people found it less in your face, that I would ask, could I come and see what they do there? I'm really interested in what a technician does within their organization. Could I come and have a chat to you? Because I'd like to get into this line of work a bit more. It'd be really great to talk to someone who has experience, knowledge, blah, blah, blah. And then you can, once you've made a kind of personal connection, because that's what it's about more than anything, of getting that kind of personal connection, then you can say like, look, if there was any work coming up in the future, I'd really appreciate if you let me know and gave me a chance. I can do X, Y, and Z. Yeah. Also, lots of places, especially if you're looking to get into fabrication and things like that, then they generally have contact information online, and you can just contact them, because at the moment, there is a real shortage of fabricators and people wanting to work in logistics. So like handling within like places like you have CART in the East Midlands, who kind of do a bit of everything. I worked for an organization like that in London here. It was a pretty rough couple of years, but I learned a lot. I learned so much. And they are really desperate for people. So it just depends on what you kind of want. But regardless, you're going to have to put yourself out there. And it's not easy. You've got to really push. Talk to people that you know. Talk to people you know that know other people and say, can you introduce me? Things like that, just to try and kind of get in and get in front of people. Is that helpful, Emily? I mean, there's not much else.
We've got a question: what type of fabrication jobs are available in the arts?
Loads.
Yeah, so, I was going to say, like, recently in my role, we've been working with really skilled welders in terms of metal fabrication for signage, for example. So, go for it, Sarah.
Yeah, fabrication, there is loads. There is definitely a shortage in fabrication in terms of especially people that can work with plastics, mold making, and welding, any sort of metal work. To be honest, there's real shortages of people that can do that, because art schools aren't so good at teaching it anymore, and that's where most of the people came from in the first place that get into art fabrication. But there's a lot of fabricators, because Artwork's getting bigger, it's getting more complex. People want to push boundaries with materials, and so fabricators are generally the ones that artists are going to these days, because also, you know, people want to experiment, or artists want to experiment in materials that they're not familiar with, but they have an idea of something made out of a material they're not familiar with fabricating. So they'll go to fabricators, especially there's a huge, I mean, it's a massive industry in itself, to be honest, art fabrication, because all the big artists these days, they all use fabricators. They very rarely fabricate a lot in their own studios. Even those, like, that's a whole other artist studios, you get lots of fabrication happening in them as well. You know, I mean, Damien Hirst, I've been to his factories, and they are bonkers. There are a lot of people that work there and a lot of people making artworks. Yeah, it's big. And also it often feeds into other industries. So you often get a lot of prop making. So MDM prop makers, they do a lot of the big fabrication of big weird things here in London, for artists all around the world though. But they started out as TV and film and theatre prop makers. They still do a little bit of it. So you'll go to their workshop and they'll have like really weird, like 3-story tall big giant bunnies and weird stuff. But yeah, it's a big industry. Yeah. Any other questions?
Well, just while we wait for a few, see if there's any final questions or thoughts coming in, just to say thank you, Sarah, for delivering that session. And thank you everyone for your thoughts and questions. Some really useful things there. And it was really great to chat over both CVs, invoicing, and a little bit more broadly around jobs and accessing roles within the arts with regards to primarily art technical work. As I think I mentioned earlier, we've got the session taking place tomorrow around RAMs and method statements, which you can still book onto via CVAN East Midlands website. And we've also got the launch of our arts worker directory happening on the 19th. So please do come along to that if you're available. Please sign up online. And again, please access it via the CVAN East Midlands website if you want to add yourself on there as a freelance art technician. We've got another question from Nathan. Do you have to specialise for a career? So arts handler, technician, program leader, etc.
No, program leader, what do you mean by that?
I mean, I was just going to say that sometimes I guess if somebody has kind of dipped their toe in different things, which is great, and I think it's important to, I guess, experiment with different career options if that's what you're interested in. I think if you are applying to something, make sure you're doing it with content that's relevant to that role. I guess like what Sarah was saying earlier about tailoring your CVs, you wouldn't necessarily I'd say I'm probably a curator or producer, but I wouldn't, I guess if you've got somebody who's a curator and they're also an art technician and they're a fabricator, they're all in the arts, but there's a lot going on there. There's some things that kind of sit more closely together, so like technician and fabricator, yes, but if you're a director of an organization and a fabricator and a website designer, one, you'd be really busy, but two, it might get a little bit I guess confusing for employers as well, I think, as well, because if they're employing you, they want to know that you're going to stay in the role and you're doing something that you find fulfilling, and you're not necessarily kind of darting in between things. But obviously, many people have career changes, they shift from doing one thing to another for many reasons, and that's absolutely fine. But I think maybe program lead and art technician, no, but art handler, art technician, fabricator, yes. Website designer, website developer, yes. Event photographer, install photographer, yes.
Because I mean, I do I call myself an art technician because I think it's a really good broad term, because I do fabrication, I do install, I do packing, I do the full kind of spectrum of like art technical work. It just depends, and because we're called lots of different things as well, like you'll get gallery technician, museum technician, install technician, you'll get art handler, You'll get all sort collection assistant sometimes can even be doing so. Like if there's lots of different names for what we do. That's why it's really important, if you're going for jobs, read the job description really, really carefully, to know that it's right for you. It's something you want primarily. Yeah. Anything else? Oh, I think it might be dinner time.
I'm sure everyone here has been eating.
Oh yeah, you're eating with the videos off.
Thank you again, everyone, and hopefully we'll see you at some of the other activity that we've got programmed for this project. Thank you, everyone. Thank you again, Sarah. I'll stop recording.
Thank you, Colette, for organising us.
No problem. Have a good evening. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.